maybe there's other people out there who may not have the same stakes. They may not be in that state I was in, but are they really on fire for what they do? You see today, a lot of people are just going through the motions. I mean, 60% of the population says they're just okay with their job or less. They're just going through the motions. And it feels to me like, well, can we help them? Can we help them not just go through the motions, but can we help them really bring their whole self and all their energy to their job? And if they can't, find another job. There's plenty of people hiring today. So I like the idea of passion as being a driver. For me, it was helping people do what I couldn't do and maybe shed some light on why they were struggling, because I'd gone through it. So it's just taking what my experience was and sharing it with them through curriculum and through coaching and content.
In today's ultra-competitive business world, being a successful entrepreneur or business owner can be very challenging. Fortunately, contemporary times have blessed us with resources for tackling those challenges and getting us to success more quickly than we could have imagined. Welcome to The Root of All Success with the real Jason Duncan, a podcast that explores how the world's most powerful entrepreneurs grow incredible companies. This podcast looks at the 5 keys to unlocking success as an entrepreneur. A successful educator turned entrepreneur, Jason's mission is to use his gifts of teaching and leadership to help others get the results they want out of life. Join Jason every week and learn the keys to grow a truly successful business.
Welcome back to another episode of The Root of All Success with the real Jason Duncan. That's me. I am so glad that you're here today. I've got a guest on my show today that I have been listening to his podcast for years. And I don't remember what the total podcast count is, but he has the longest running sales focused podcast in the history of the world. And he and his co-hosts have done a fantastic job. They release one every week. They're based out of Indianapolis. I'll give a formal introduction here in just a minute, but you're in for a treat today. It's going to be a great show. But I want to say, first of all, thanks for listening. Thank you for tuning in on YouTube. If you're watching this on YouTube, thank you. Hello, how you doing? Also, thank you for listening to it on the podcast player of your choice, whether it's Stitcher, Spotify, iTunes, or any of the others. Thank you for doing that. And if you haven't hit that subscribe or follow button, please do that. The subscriber count helps my podcast get further up in the algorithm, so it puts it in front of more people. So if you like what you're hearing and you feel like that it would be valuable for other people to hear, hit the like, hit the subscribe, leave me a 5-star review. That helps get the algorithm to see this is popular, good content for entrepreneurs and for the business world. So please do that. Thank you. If you are familiar with what I do, you already know this, but if you're not familiar, and then maybe this is the first time you've tuned in, I want to take just a second to tell you what I do, because this podcast was born out of my personal brand and the coaching and consulting company at TRJD Enterprises. And I coach business owners and entrepreneurs. And the main thing I focus on is how to accelerate your business to the place where you can get more time, more money, more freedom. And there are 4 very specific strategies that I teach. One is about delegation. I've mastered the art of delegating. And when I show you how to do it, it frees up your time so much that now you can scale your company to where you really want to go. It gets you out of the weeds. And then I teach you how to eliminate stress. I've got a strategy on systems and processes that are particularly focused around sales. And then my 4th strategy is about investing in people. So if you're interested in how to take those strategies to the next level, I do a webinar every so often. And that webinar is open to the public. You can go to my website. It's therealjasonduncan.com/webinar. Very simple, right? Therealjasonduncan.com/webinar. And you can register for the next one, and you can hear how to implement those strategies completely for free. You don't have to pay for the webinar. It's a 45-minute webinar. You can come in and do it for free on the next one that I do. So go check that out at therealjasonduncan.com/webinar. All right, let me introduce today's guest. Today's guest is Bill Caskey. He's a sales leader, a business development leader, has a fantastic podcast called the Advanced Selling Podcast. He also has another podcast called the Bill Caskey Podcast, which goes into it's not primarily sales, it's more of a deeper dive into achievement. But he's been improving business to business sales teams and executives since 1990. So he's been in the game for a long time, and he knows what he's talking about. He's very, very good at it. His sales philosophies and strategies have fueled explosive growth for his clients, and he can do the same thing for you. He's very passionate about his ideas and about selling and about business and about life and money and meaning. And he works a little bit more than just in the B2B market, but that's what he focuses on. He's written several books. One of the best books that I think that he's written, and the one that I like the most, is Same Game, New Rules. But he also wrote one called Rewire The Sales Mind. He's also wrote the Sales Playbook. And as I said, he's a co-host of a couple of podcasts. His success and passions are rooted in his family and his community service. He lives in Indianapolis with his family. He spends a lot of time with his wife, Jane, and their two daughters, Kelly and Kara, and who work both at Indianapolis and Denver. And I had the pleasure of meeting Kara, his daughter, one time here in Nashville. He and Kara flew in, and we ended up having coffee here in Nashville. I got to meet his daughter, give her some advice about her career as she was getting things going on her own side. And then Bill and I spent some time together in Indianapolis, where he lives, when I was working with one of my customers in Indianapolis several years ago. He's also the creator of a mentor program called the High Achievers Mentor Program. It's a small group coaching program for high-performing business-to-business sales leaders who want to scale their income. So today on this show, we're going to talk about his view of success, and you're going to hear his honest and transparent answer today about what he believes success is and how difficult it is for him to define it and to admit that he is successful. So it's a little bit of different take than what you normally hear on the show, but nonetheless, extremely valuable. So let me help you. Welcome to the show, Bill Caskey. Well, Bill, welcome to the show. It is such an honor to be sitting across the Zoom screen with you on my show after listening to your show for all these years.
The last time we met, I think we either hoisted a drink or a coffee or smoked a cigar or something in Indianapolis, but that was like a century ago. So you haven't changed, though. In fact, I'd say you've improved. Your looks have improved in the last 5 years.
Yeah, well, I try, man. It's the COVID.
Yeah, the COVID improvement.
Well, what's funny is that a lot of people during COVID were talking about gaining weight and stuff. And I've actually, I don't know why. My life is not really any different than anybody else's, but I'm actually down several pounds and feel better. I'm working out more. So, but yeah, it was a long time ago. We had a customer, one of the companies I own, we had a customer in Indianapolis. And I'm obviously, as I said in the intro, I'm a big fan of your show, and I knew you were out of Indy. And I reached out and said, hey, man, I'm a huge fan. Can we get together and meet up? I'm a cigar guy. I know you're a cigar guy. Let's meet. I think we met. Is it Blend? Is
Blend.
That what's?
Yeah. Which is now in Nashville. I think there's a Blend.
Yeah, there's one down the street from the club that I belong to, the Standard downtown. But they, we hung out at Blend, had some sort of adult beverage and a cigar and enjoyed time. And then you even came and did some work on a project with us as a coach. So yeah, that's forever ago. I don't even remember what year that was. It was a long time ago. But anyway, here we are today. And as I said, I'm honored that you're on the show. So as a sales coach and a prolific podcaster that you are, I want you to start our conversation today by telling us when did you get your start as an entrepreneur? Because this show really is all about the success of entrepreneurs. So if you go back in your life, was it as a kid that you had entrepreneurial aspirations? Was it not until an adult? Did you have a corporate career first? How did you get into the entrepreneurial game?
Well, thank you. And yes, I'm really pleased to be on. Looking forward to this because I love the podcast model where it's stream of consciousness and there's stories. And I just find that a lot more interesting than if somebody's coming on making a pitch. So I will not make any pitches today. So I appreciate you hosting this. Probably my first entrepreneurial experience was I was a paper boy for the Indianapolis Star, a morning newspaper. So I had to get up at 5 a.m. every day I probably had that for 2 years. And I never wanted to do it, but my dad wanted me to do it. And I did it. And he actually got up on a lot of those mornings where I didn't want to get up. He got up with me to make sure I delivered the papers. And it was good. It was good for me because there was responsibility there. I was collecting money. It was prospecting, which I didn't like, going up to new people, doors that I wasn't delivering and asking if, because I never had any success at that. And so therefore, after 4 or 5, I said, well, this is no fun. This hurts when somebody says no. So I'm not going to do that anymore. But then when I got to college, I got involved in radio and communications. My major was psychology and communications. And coincidentally enough, that's kind of all I do today is psychology and communications as a coach for business people and leaders and salespeople. But then I had a corporate job for a few years, and it just didn't suit me. It just wasn't me. And it just felt bland. And I had a episode with addictions in my 20s, and I just drank too much and ended up in a rehab hospital when I was 29 years old. I came out of there, and it breathed new life into me. And it gave me the courage to say to my corporate job, you know what, I'm going to move on. And so I bought a franchise, I bought a business. And so that's when my true entrepreneurial spirit started to kick in, is after I got out of treatment, got a year behind me, and then I started my own business.
So how old were you when you were doing the paperboy stuff?
I was probably 10, 12. Yeah, 12.
That's that kids don't even have that anymore. I mean, newspaper, are they even a thing? I couldn't tell you the last time
I don't read them.
The day after Thanksgiving, really, that's the only time we ever think about it, because that's when the coupons come out, or the Thanksgiving Day paper with the coupons for Black Friday. So I've been listening to you for years, and I've never heard your story about addictions. And you might have said it. I missed it when you talked about it, but I didn't really know that was part of your story. So what do you think about, what was it about coming out of the addiction and the treatment that said, I got to go do something on my own. I can't work for the man anymore.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's see. How deep do I want to go with this? Addictions to me happened because I was afraid of my own shadow. Even though I was 6'5", 210, played basketball, played in college, was not afraid physically of anything, but emotionally and mentally, I don't know whether I was stunted. And I do think alcohol does that to you at some point too. But I had a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear. And what do you do with the fear and anxiety? You make it feel better. What makes it feel better? Drugs and alcohol. And my drug of choice was alcohol, not, but the point there is that you go down this path, and you think it's a fine path to go down. You're partying on the weekends, and you're partying on Thursday night, and then Wednesday night has happy hour. And before you know it, every night of the week, you're doing something, and you're looking forward to that thing every night. And at some point you sit there on the side of your bed and say, this is not a recipe for success. You're better than this, Bill. You are a hostage to the drug or the drink, and you had better do something, or you're going to lose your wife, which I eventually did. But after I was sober, we kind of both decided it wasn't a fit, or you're going to lose your job or your life. And when you have those conversations with yourself, I think those conversations that you have on the side of your bed at night are really good, because that's when the real stuff starts to come out. And most of us don't have those because we're too busy consuming media. And we get to the point where we're watching a show and we're nodding off, and then we go to bed and we fall asleep instead of having these reflections. And so I started to have those, and I sought help. I went in one day to my boss and I said, I got a problem. And he said, yeah, I know. Everybody else knew. I thought I was delivering news to them like a paperboy, but they all knew. And so I went and got help, total support. Everybody was supportive, and I haven't had a need to drink for 31 years now.
So your awareness is a key to recovery in all aspects of life. But so you came out of that, though. I mean, but why, when you got out of that, why was it, okay, I'm not going back to work 40 hours a week for somebody else. I want to buy this franchise and do my own thing. Do you remember what motivated you to do that as opposed to going back to the corporate world?
Well, I think I had more confidence because I was sober, and I was clear thinking because I was sober. And I think I looked at the market, looked at the world very differently. I wasn't afraid anymore. I'm not saying I was massive, fearless, courageous, but I didn't have the anxiety that I used to have, because I had coping mechanisms for that between spiritual guidance and meetings and meditation. And so I think I was just ready. I was probably ready at 25, but I couldn't have done it then because I would have failed miserably. So once I sobered up, I saw some opportunities. I felt like the sales game was changing. And this was back in, 30 years ago. Sales game was changing, and all the training that we went to was awful. It was just terrible. And I thought, well, maybe I can take some of the principles of what I'm learning in recovery and move those into training. In fact, I wrote a book 20 years ago called Same Game, New Rules. And in the back, I talk about progress, not perfection, which is an old AA saying. And I can't tell you how many people have emailed me and said, are you in the AA program? Because just this one little sliver is like, uh-oh. Anyway, but I used to be, I was never ashamed of it, but I never wore it on my sleeve. And more recently, the last few years, the reason you haven't heard the stories because I've only started telling it because I think it might help other people.
Yeah, I've got a mastermind that I run called the Exeter Club, and I had a session just last week with my guys, and one of the three guys that was supposed to be on the hot seat didn't show up. His wife went into labor and he wasn't able to make it. Good excuse, right? So he wasn't able to make it. Well, the third spot was open, and one of the guys in the mastermind said, "Hey, Jason, why don't you get on the hot seat?" And dude, I needed it badly. I was in a bad place. I was dealing with a lot of crap, and I was able to unload. And then last night, I had a cocktail party with the club, with my mastermind, and that one of the guys that was there said, that you being vulnerable about what you're struggling with helps all of us so much more. So, Bill, I'm glad you're telling that story. I think it will help. I think our vulnerability as leaders and public figures does more than we think.
I totally agree.
When we do that. So thank you for being transparent about that. So what franchise?
It's like we all need the courage to do this thing, and we can't muster it until we see somebody else, and we'll say, well, heck, if they can do it, I can do it. That's courage is contagious. It really is. And I think in this day that we live in, where there's a lot of canceling going on, where we're kind of afraid to speak our mind on certain things, and certain things I don't speak my mind on because it's none of anybody's business. But certain things I'd like to, and then I get that idea. What if I say that? Are my customers not going to like it? And then I see other people who are courageous enough to speak out on some of these controversial issues. And I'm like, well, yeah, what, so what? And it's when you speak out, you realize, oh, there's a lot of people there who respect that, and they call you and they agree with you, but they can't say anything, So it's a weird time we lived in. I bought a sales training franchise back in '89, and I had it for 5 years. And I prefer not to mention the name of it because just for legal reasons. But I didn't I liked a lot of what they did, but I didn't like other parts of what they did. And so I started my own business. And when I left that, I was with them for 5 years, but it really did help me get kind of in the swing of how do you prospect? How do you get clients? What kind of content do you teach? So it was a good experience, but it was only 5 years.
So the name of your business today is what?
The name of my business is just my name, Bill Caskey. I decided to go the personal brand route a few years ago instead of a company, because it is just me and I've got 2 or 3 other people, but it's a very small organization. I'm very picky about the kind of client I work with. I primarily work with B2B clients. Now I've got curriculum that I've named other things based on whether it's a leadership program or a high achievers program. We work with some super high achievers in the B2B space. So I've named those programs, but the company is just me.
Well, I mean, that's how I know you. I mean, I know you through the Advanced Selling Podcast, of course, because I've been a huge fan of that. You and Brian do a great job with that show. And I knew that you had a company, but I assumed that the company name was not what I thought it used to be. So that's why I wanted to ask. So just Bill Caskey. But what's interesting about the personal brand thing, because I've established a personal brand as the real Jason Duncan. And it's weird I don't even know what that means anymore. Like what is a personal brand? But I know I hired a marketing agent a year or 2 ago, and they said, yeah, you need to be the real Jason Duncan. That's who you are. That just accept it and go with it. So
it gives you some flexibility to do a lot of things, because I know you've got mastermind programs. You're going to be investing in other businesses at some point. Maybe one day you want to have an online course. I mean, but your brand was going to be with you whether you name your company something or not. So I think it's a good move.
Yeah, well, so it's interesting about the personal branding thing. So you started your own sales training and coaching business back in 1990. 1990. So you started in 1990. So you went through the 90s where it always be closing and the coffee for closers, and you went through all that. And how have you seen, like, what's the biggest change in the sales methodologies or psychology behind sales as opposed to the way it was when you started in the 90s? What's the biggest change that you could pull out for people that we would recognize?
Mm-hmm. Probably the biggest change is well, I don't know. It's a good question. There's a lot of them, and it depends on if you're talking about what's taught to salespeople, how it's taught to salespeople, and then what are some changes that need to be happening that aren't, which we can get into maybe later if you want. But I think the biggest thing is we've tried to get away from this old Glenn Ross, high pressure, convince and persuade game. And that I'm grateful for that. I think a lot of trainers have come along and said, look, that number one, it doesn't work. Number two, people can't use it. Salespeople can't do it if that's not their makeup and their personality. And we always talk about client success and customer success, and we've got to do what the customer wants. And then we're going in and we're putting pressure on them. It doesn't fit. So I think the exertion of pressure from salespeople to prospects, price goes up on Monday. I've got this deal, but it's only good through Friday at 9. I mean, all that stuff. The consumer is so sharp today. They're onto that stuff. They see it coming a mile away,
Yeah, it's funny because I started my sales career in the early 90s, but as a salesperson, not running my own thing. And I remember going through training about relationship selling, you just got to be buddies with everybody. If you're buddies, and when you walk in, sell off the walls, if they got a bass hanging on the wall, talk about fishing, if they got golf. And now when I train salespeople, I'm like,
no,
do not.
I don't care if they have a live fish on the wall. Say nothing. Say nothing.
Unless you
got a
actually
shark flapping back and forth.
Billy Bass is not going to help you close this deal.
Oh, it's funny.
Well, so tell me about how you got that sales training, or so you got your feet wet in a franchise which taught you the systems and processes, but then you said, I don't really like this. I'm going to go do my own thing. What was it about doing your own thing that you thought I can be more successful at this than doing the franchise method?
Well, when you buy a franchise, you kind of have to do it the way the franchise wants you to do it. There is some leeway and flexibility, but generally, I mean, McDonald's, you don't walk into a McDonald's and they're not serving Big Macs. They have to do that. And so with the franchise, you have a little bit of a hostage situation. There were things that I wanted to get into, like from my AA past, mental attitudes, psychological well-being, self-image and self-esteem. I think all that stuff played a big role in helping me get through what I went through. And from what I've seen the last 20 years, and we're still heavy into it, all that stuff is relevant today. And nobody else was really teaching that back then. Some are today, but still not many. And so I think my ability to take what I'd learned through life experience, bring it into training was vital. I think it really separated us, and still does today, from most people who are just trying to get the salespeople to make more calls. I feel like, well, it's a little bit more complicated than that. But so that's why I got into it, because I felt I had something unique to offer.
Now, you wrote Same Game, New Rules was your first book. Is that correct?
It was, and I've got a copy right here.
Yeah, so
look at that, huh?
Folks that are watching on YouTube, you can see the book. That is a fantastic book. 20 years old or not, like, that is a great book. And what I find interesting about that is that it's mostly, in my opinion, it's mindset. It's not tactics, strategy, although there's stuff in there about tactics and strategy, like Clear Future is a tactic. You got to get that right. And for those that don't know what that is, you should look up the book and understand what Clear Future is. I teach that 100% of the time.
Good.
But I think that it's mostly mindset, like detachment. Knowing that I'm attached to the process because I'm in control of the process, but I'm detached from the outcome, and I'm not going to live or die by the outcome. So I love what you wrote, and it stood the test of time. And I don't really see, in my opinion, as a person who sold, 25 million plus of stuff over the last decade or two, I don't think it's changing. I think that's where we are now. There certainly do tactics and strategies, but the mindset game, you had it right a long time ago.
Yeah. And I've thought about rewriting the thing many times, and to rewrite a book, you almost have to start over. It's not like you can take out a chapter here and add a chapter there. And I look at this sometimes, and some of the language that I would use today is different than what I used 20 years ago. But the concepts really haven't. I said 23 timeless principles for selling and negotiating, and they really kind of are. I even poke holes in it sometimes, but I still get back to it's 90% as accurate today and legitimate and relevant as it was 20 years ago. So I agree with you. I think the mindset part of achievement. Let's talk about achievement now, not just selling, because I think we get locked into selling, and really I had a guy yesterday who was a leader of a team, a pretty large team. He says, I read your book. All these things are as relevant for leaders as they are for salespeople, because the leader still has to have high intention. They've got to detach from outcomes. If you've got a salesperson or a person on your team that's not performing, you can't get attached to them, because you're not going to let them go or let them grow, or you can't cut them loose because you're too friendly with them. That's where detachment comes in. So I think some of the mindset things really have grown up, and I teach them very differently now than I did 20 years ago, but they're still relevant.
We're going to take a break from our show right now to bring you our sponsors. All right, thanks for listening to our sponsors. Now back to the show. So when you started your own thing, and you developed your own processes and tactics and strategies and systems and mindset ideals, what was the hardest part about getting over the hump as a brand new owner of your own thing? Do you remember back when you started that? Like, this was the biggest, hardest thing for me to overcome, because you're obviously very successful now, at least from everybody looking in. It's very successful now, but a long time ago when you started, I'm sure there were a lot of struggles. What was one of the biggest at the beginning that you remember?
Well, I've never been good at calling somebody up on the phone cold and working them through a system where they give me money. I've just never been good at that. Now, if somebody calls me, or they listen to a podcast. I get a lot of calls from people listening to podcasts. Once every week or so, somebody calls and says, "Hey, I've heard your podcast. I want you to come in and help." So I know the podcast works, and I love doing mine too, is just like you're doing yours. I think there's a lot of byproduct value out of doing it, other than just, does money come in? But I was never good at that cold call thing. I was never good. Some people are, you probably are. I just didn't like it. It always felt like, God, I'm just kind of putting my hand in the meat grinder here. I mean, and supposed to enjoy it. And then everybody sits around. How many cold calls you made? Well, I made 27 cold calls. No, you didn't. I saw you. You didn't pick up the phone once. So I think there's a lot of truth that nobody really likes them. And so I thought, well, what's another alternative? Can we find prospects in a different way? And the internet came along. And so that's why over the last 20 years, I've been really focused on how do we use digital technology to help us so that we don't have to sit there and bang out cold calls, because it's not very efficient either. And so internet technology and digital technology really, to me, and I don't think salespeople use it very well, but it's there. And those people who do are going to be winners in the long term.
So I think that you're a very successful guy. I mean, I look up to you as an indirect mentor of mine. And I talk about, when I coach my clients, about direct and indirect mentorship and coaching. I think everybody should have a direct mentor or coach that they're working with one-on-one, or at least in a group setting.
I agree.
But I think we overlook the fact that in those times where money is tight and time is tight, you can get indirect mentorship from people like you, and hopefully from people like me, by listening to podcasts, reading their books, watching YouTube videos. Totally. So you've been a very good and successful indirect mentor of mine over all these years of me being an entrepreneur and a salesperson. So thank you for that. But I want to ask you this question. How do you, Bill Caskey, define that word success? Because it's such a weird word, but this show is about success. So how do you define that word?
You told me you were going to ask this, but you gave me like 10 seconds to figure it out. And now you lay it on me. I thought it was going to be at the end. So now I've got to think. I've got to think quickly. Yeah, that's good. It's probably better that I just ramble for a minute and a half, if you would spare me that time. I don't know. It just seems like a lot of times we are asked the very difficult question, and you have to tell me if you agree with this or not. You may not. The most difficult question for us to answer when a coach comes along and we think we need coaching is, what do you want? What do you want? Jason, what do you want? So you say that things aren't going where they need to be and you'd like to be at a different place. Well, tell me about that place you'd like to get to. What do you want? It's a hard question for people. And I think it's a hard question for me too, because what you want changes. Sometimes we say we want something, but it doesn't really fire us up much. We say we want it because that's what everybody else says they want. They want to be a millionaire. They want to have $1 billion. They want to have $1 trillion. And then you get it and you're like, Okay, well, I lost a family and I lost I lost everything to get the $1 billion. Well, it doesn't feel very good now. And I'm not saying that you have to lose everything to accomplish big things, but I think what you want is the biggest part of that success journey. And that, to me, it's that progressive working toward what you really want that is successful. Whether you ever get it or not, I think if it's a values-based thing, it fits your values. Like I want to be a president of a company, let's just say. Well, there's this online porn company that needs a CEO. Well, if you're a Christian, that's probably not a good thing for you to take that job, even though your goal was CEO. So I think it has to be values-based. I think there's got to be values alignment based on what you want and who you are. But I think it's really good for us to be consciously thinking about what we want. And I think the progression toward that every day, every week is success. And because it always will feel like there's movement and I'm moving towards something. Yeah, I moved back a little bit today, but tomorrow I'm going to move toward it. I think that's success.
With that in mind, as the backdrop for the definition, do you consider yourself to be successful?
I consider no, not really. Got some other psychological problems there. When I was
show's over. We're canceling.
You're no longer my indirect mentor. Yeah, I did a test. It's called the Hogan, and it was a personality test, and it addressed some internal values and preferences. And one of the things that I scored 0 out of 6 on. I mean, it was a scale of 1 to 10. If you're 6 out of 6, it means you're high. If you're 0 out of 6, you're a loser. But one of the things was a sense of accomplishment. I literally was 0 out of 6, which means I don't take great pride in my accomplishments. So when even though I look back and say, well, that was pretty cool. Yeah, we did that. Yeah, the podcast has been good. Yeah, I've made a good living. Yeah, I've saved some money. When you ask me, am I successful? It's literally almost impossible for me to say yes to that because of this accomplishment thing. So deep down, if you were to catch me at a weak moment, which you haven't today, but if you were to catch me at a weak moment, I'm just kidding. I would probably say, yeah, you know what? I've been very lucky. I'm grateful. I'm blessed. I feel like I do good work. I don't screw people over. People have learned from me. I think their lives have gotten better. So overall, yeah, I'd say I've been a success. But
well, let me help you with that.
Okay.
I don't normally do this, but I'm going to help you with this. Since you said what you said, I'm going to say this. So the dictionary definition of success revolves around this idea of when you get what you wanted or you achieved the intended results or the thing you desired at the beginning. So for instance, if you wanted to become the president of that company and you became the president, you're successful. If you wanted to make $100,000 a year, you made it, you're successful. You want to make $1 million, whatever. So success is defined by the result that you desire.
Outcome. Yeah.
So I would think, based on what I know about you, is that you've achieved a lot, maybe not all, but a lot of what you intended to set out to achieve. Therefore, by dictionary definition, you are successful. So maybe that will help you a little bit.
Mm-hmm. It seems like a shallow definition, though. I'm not saying it's not legit. It just seems like there's the surface meaning of success, which this is, but then there's the deeper, more soulful meaning, which is probably something that we all could spend a little time thinking about. It's that, who was it? Dale Carnegie or somebody talked about success being the progression toward a worthy ideal.
Yeah.
Success is the progression toward a worthy ideal. So the worthy ideal is what you want, and it's got to have some values to it. And progression is just, are you making progress toward it? And so, but yeah.
Well, I think the juxtaposition of the idea of success for this show is that a lot of people as entrepreneurs in the world of entrepreneurship or wantrpreneurship is we look at success as Lamborghinis and mansions and girls in bikinis riding in the shotgun with you. And on a beach.
Sounds good.
Yeah, it sounds good. But that is for some people the definition of success, but it is not the definition of success. It is someone's definition, but not the. I think Instagram makes you think that. YouTube, that is what makes people think that's success. Yeah. But I look at you, I knew what car you were driving the day that we were there. It wasn't a Lamborghini. You might own one, but like that's not where it doesn't seem to me, and nor is it mine.
Did we sell that Lamborghini? Did we sell that? Yeah, we did. Yeah. So no, I don't.
But I think that for people like you and me and the people listening is we want a realistic view of what success really is, which is why I started the show, the root of all success. I wanted, what is it? What are we getting at? What are we trying to get to? And if it's you changing the world through business to business salespeople and high achievers and with your high achievers mentor program, that is successful. And it doesn't have to involve $300,000 automobiles or $20 million mansions. It is what we need. And that's why I do the show. And I base this, and this is kind of when I kind of pivot a little bit to my theory. So Bill, I've got this theory after I started my own company and became successful kind of in the world's view of, hey, I was making money. I built a pretty good company. I started asking other people who are entrepreneurs how they did it. Like, how did you do this? Very casual conversations. And what I found is that these 5 keys kept showing up every single time. Everybody used different words for it, but I started paying attention, just as an observer, these 5 things. And so what I'd like to do is I like to run you through these 5 things and see how they played into your story when you started when you started the franchise, and then when you went out on your own, and then you developed your own successful podcast. So the first one I found as I was discovering this through talking to people is that the first key is passion. Is if you're going to be successful, you have to have passion, but it isn't what most people think. Most people think when I say passion, they think you got to like it, enjoy it. It's got to be fun. And while I believe that side of passion, the emotional side of passion is kind of greases the skids and it makes it a little extra. The reality is that the word passion means willing to endure or even willing to suffer. So like when we think about the passion of the Christ, we call it that because he was willing to suffer. So in your story, Bill, this is where the question comes in. In your story of success, where did you see passion, that side of passion, that mental side of passion play into your story?
I think because I was a very average salesperson and it felt really bad and I could have died because I was medicating and numbing the sensations that came with being a loser in the sales game. I mean, I was never at the bottom of the rank, but I was never at the top. I was always in that middle tier. I think the fact that I almost killed myself over it, not suicidally, but from alcohol, caused me to say, maybe there's other people out there who may not have the same stakes. They may not be in that state I was in, but are they really on fire for what they do? You see today, a lot of people are just going through the motions. I mean, 60% of the population says they're just okay with their job or less. They're just going through the motions. And it feels to me like, well, can we help them? Can we help them not just go through the motions, but can we help them really bring their whole self and all their energy to their job? And if they can't, find another job. There's plenty of people hiring today. So I like the idea of passion as being a driver. For me, it was helping people do what I couldn't do and maybe shed some light on why they were struggling because I'd gone through it. So it's just taking what my experience was and sharing it with them through curriculum and through coaching and content.
I also discovered when I was having these conversations with people that being at the right place at the right time. And if you look at these all start with P, by the way, because I used to be a pastor, so I have to do alliteration. I think that's the rule. Yeah. So passion.
Don't throw me a curveball and put an E in the bottom of the pie.
So the second is place. Be in the right place at the right time. And I found that most entrepreneurs can point to a place and time. And some people are thinking more deeply like, well, if Elon Musk had been born in the 50s, we wouldn't even know who he is because he wouldn't have access to the technology. So there is that place and time concept. But more specifically, it's about, hey, I went to this networking event. I joined this group. I was a member of this church, or I lived in the city. Or is there a place and time that you can look back and say, man, had I not been at that place in that time, I wouldn't be who I am today?
Oh man, this is a deep one. Can you edit out the silence?
It's suspenseful. We'll leave it.
Yeah, that is. Yeah. Lots of things are rolling through the old brain here. I'm not sure I can point to something other than my addiction and recovery from that, as that was the time that made all this work. Because had I not gone through that, it never would have been a good time. So that's probably the thing I keep coming back to, that when the world opened up to me after that, it was time. It was time to do something. But I don't think the world was like, hollering for a sales trainer. I don't think, and certainly not today because there's 40 million of them. I don't think it was a more like a worldwide phenom thing at all. I think it was just I was ready. So I think place and time are dictated by you too. I mean, Elon Musk couldn't have done it in the 50s, but he wouldn't have even tried it in the 50s if it had been the same guy. He would have done something else.
Yeah,
it would have been more appropriate for the time. I saw a story the other day. I wrote an article about Dick Fosbury. It was like the 60th anniversary of his, I don't know, maybe he was, I don't know, birthday or something. You know who Dick Fosbury is? He came
heard
up
the name, but I'm not familiar.
Fosbury flop. The Fosbury flop was a high jump where they go over on their back, which everybody does now. But back in the 60s and 70s, it was all roll. Everybody was rolling.
Yep.
And he came up with this concept. But guess what? There was no foam pads in the pit. So he would literally jump over and he would have pillows and blankets and things, but he would land on his back on a hard surface on dirt. Once the foam pit was invented, now everybody was doing the Fosbury flop so that was a matter that if the foam pit never would have been invented, probably we would still be rolling. I use that term very loosely when we're high jumping. And so that's a matter of did the foam pit come along because Fosbury came along, or was it just coincidental? And the same thing goes for, like, you've heard the stories about Bill Gates and all those guys who all grew up in that time in the early 60s when they had access to these massive computers and that's how they learned. And had they grown up a few years later, it wouldn't have been them, but it might have been somebody else.
Yeah. Well, I think that, everybody has that place in time, and sometimes it's not immediately recognizable. So I actually had a podcast, had a guest on the podcast last year, and we were talking about this concept. And I mentioned back to him, just because he told his story, and I mentioned back to him, I said, if your mom hadn't moved to that city because of this thing that happened, I wouldn't know nobody would know who you are.
I love those things because that's really bizarre when you think about it.
Well, he broke down. He started, he wasn't weeping, but he was emotionally moved to tears. And he's like, pause, stop. I don't want this to be in the podcast. And of course we cut that out because we wanted to honor him. But sometimes people don't even think about it. And maybe perhaps later, after this conversation, you'll go, wow, there is this one meeting I went to that I met that sales guy and, blah, blah. I don't know what it was for you, Bill, but I know it's probably there somewhere.
It's probably there somewhere. Yeah.
Let me give you the third one. The third one is people, is knowing the right people. And I can look at in my life, having certain people, and of course, my wife being one of the most important people in my life to help prod me on to success. But there are also negative people. For instance, I had a business partner that I started my ELS company with, that we were great friends and everything was good. But at some point it turned really badly, and we had to terminate our relationship, to terminate the partnership. But because of that, holy moly, like my life exploded. Now it sucked at first because I almost went bankrupt in that process, but eventually, it exploded after the fact. Do you have a person or persons that you can look back to and say, man, if this person hadn't been there, I wouldn't be who I am?
Well, I've had some coaches over the years. I played basketball in high school and college, and I had a great coach in high school who really believed in me. And to me, that's the positive part of that. There are negative people too, but does someone believe in you, maybe even more than you believe in you? And there are people out there who believe in us, but they seldom tell us that. And then we think nobody believes in us because we don't believe in ourselves, when the fact is a lot of people believe in you. And so I think part of that, finding a mentor or understanding what role people play in your life, you have to look back and say, who believed in me? Who really was in my corner when times were tough? Who was struggling? I think my basketball coach, I had a psychotherapist friend who was really helpful for me when I was going through. I had a divorce after I got sober, and it was difficult. And so they were there. Now I was paying them to be there, but that's okay. It was a nominal amount. But yeah, I think that if I could just underline that, the idea would be who's in your corner when nobody else is in your corner. And that might be an interesting way for you to look back and say, who are the people that were really there? And it's those people that really mattered. And we should probably thank those people, even if it's been 20 years, go back and thank them because they played a big role.
Yeah, I know that a lot of times when I ask this question, a fair amount of times people mention teachers in their life. And I used to be a teacher, so I'm always paying attention to that. It's like, yeah, I hope that I've got kids that I taught when I was a school teacher that can look back and say, yeah, Mr. Duncan was the guy that helped me do whatever. But I always ask when they say it was a teacher or somebody from way back in the past, did they know this? Did they know that they're the person that helped make you who you are today? And sometimes they go, no, they don't. And I encourage them to do that. So if you're listening as a listener and you have somebody in your life like that, let them know. I got a message from a guy that when I was in pastoral youth ministry back in the mid 90s, there was a kid in my youth group. And I listen, I wouldn't know the guy from Adam. I didn't remember his name, but he hunted me down on Facebook about 4 years ago and just sent me this really amazing letter. I'm like, I don't even remember this kid's name. So it made me feel great about what I did. And I think we need to pour that back in.
You felt ashamed that you didn't remember.
Well, I did. I was like, I don't remember.
I don't remember. The reverse effect. You were proud for 30 seconds, and then you went into a full shame course.
Well, so let me go to the fourth P, the fourth key of success, and that is preparation. And I think that what this key means to me is you have to know how to pull it off. For example, it is not likely if you and I decide to go into business together, we could start a biotech firm or something, because we probably aren't prepared for that. We would need to take time to prepare. But you went into the sales game. I went into, at the time, entrepreneur game and lighting, et cetera. But what prepared you to be the successful sales trainer and coach that you are today?
Yeah. Well, assuming that I'm successful, and I think people like our content. I think the thing that prepared me was I always had an interest in psychology. And I don't even know why. It's not like my dad taught me. It's just, I've always been interested in why people do what they do. How did we all get here? What's our role here on the planet? I've always just been into existential stuff. And I literally cannot tell you, like, I read a book, when I was 12. I never understood why, but I majored in psychology, or minored in psychology, in college, and I loved it. And communications I loved because I loved the media. I loved radio. I loved radio. Here's a stupid little thing. When I was 10 years old in 1966, I would sit at my desk in my room. I had a little desk, and I would have some kind of, it wasn't a camera because we couldn't afford a camera, but I would pretend like I was doing election results during the general election in the US. And so I would have the TV over there, and I would be looking at my audience, I guess, doing this. And my parents used to laugh. I told my wife that. She goes, don't ever tell that story. So here I am. But I don't know why. I just always thought it would be cool to sit in front of a microphone or a camera and speak so that other people could learn and engage and whatever. So I've always had that passion. I was in radio in my college years. So that's probably part of the preparation, is just experience doing the things that I eventually do now with podcasting and with broadcasting and with standing up in front of people and speaking and with coaching. All that fits under communication and psychology.
And I know that you're an audio snob. You talk about it on your podcast when people submit. I like your microphone. What is it? What is that microphone?
It is well, thank you for asking. I'm very proud of this. It's a Shure SMB7. It's I saw Joe Rogan had one, so I had to have it. It's about a $400 device, but really works well.
Well, it sounds good. You're always sounding good. I'm hoping that I sound.
You sound great. What do you have?
This is just a Blue Yeti.
Oh yeah, it sounds really good.
This little guy right here in front of me.
Yeah, sounds really.
So my wife bought this for me for Christmas several years ago because I'd been talking about wanting to do a podcast for years, and she was tired of me saying I was going to do it and I never did it, so she bought it. And like, okay, well, I guess I got to do this thing now. So, so that's what I use.
Microphones are, I am a snob, and I still to this day, I think I went through a phase where I talked about the snobbery a lot more than I do now. But who was it? A couple of days ago, somebody said, "Well, I got my headphones on, and I know you don't like that." I'm like, "Come on, that's as long as I can hear you." That's the problem. Is when you're 20 feet away from the onboard mic on the laptop computer. I have a problem with that, especially when you're on a podcast and we can't really hear you. Who I really like is going to get political maybe, but Robert Kennedy Jr. I don't know if you know who he is.
I do.
But he runs a legal defense fund, and he's got some very interesting takes on life and pandemics and things like that. But he has this vocal problem. If you've heard him speak, and sometimes it's okay, but other times, like later in the day, if he records, and he's got this podcast, so he's got this voice that's hard to hear anyway. And he has to sit 10 feet away from the damn microphone. And so you're just literally straining to hear him. And I emailed him. I know it never got to him. Like, buddy, I love you, and I'm sorry about the voice. You gotta move closer to some kind of Blue Yeti microphone. So I'm always forever being a snob there. So anyway, sorry about that.
So now let's get to the fifth P. The fifth P is plan. And so most people think when I say plan, they think that I'm meaning business plan. And that's not at all what I mean, because in my unofficial diagnosis of what's going on out in the world, most entrepreneurs didn't have a business plan, especially a written business plan of how they're going to do it. So what I mean by plan is, what was the plan to finance the thing that you were going to start? So you started a franchise, which required some sort of franchise, money and fees, et cetera. But then you said, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to go do my own thing, which you don't have to pay anybody to do it. But what was your plan to finance that? Did you bootstrap it? Tell me how that worked out for you.
Yeah. The first was my parents loaned me the I don't know, 20 grand. I don't know what it was, the franchise fee. And I had a little savings, but it's not like I had a 4-year runway to save and to squirrel away money. I mean, I just decided one day that I was going to quit, and 30 days later, I had started this business. So I had to make the money. There was no other choice. I had to go out and sell and make the money. And I've never had to, I had to borrow money a couple of times for certain things. I got into debt about 10 years ago, and it took me about a year to get out of it. And COVID wasn't kind. I ran up a little debt here in 2020 and early 2021, but that's all behind. So I just think there's times, but it wasn't like we were having to sell the house. It was, I just didn't want to, I had other money squirreled away. I didn't want to tap into that because tax, all that stuff. But I think I think you need a plan. And I agree with you about why certain people have not succeeded during the pandemic. And I think we're never taught to plan for things like that. I mean, who would have ever thought? But a lot of retailers, a lot of eateries and restaurants have done very well because they pivoted quickly, and other people never pivoted and they're out of business. And it's sad, very sad to see, but I think the plan is important, and you've got to keep coming back to it and saying, okay, every year you've got to come back to that plan.
Yeah. And our ability to adapt will always outperform our ability to plan. And as long as we know that, it helps us. Doesn't mean we shouldn't plan, but we need to know that, your plan doesn't have to be 100% correct, because it's probably going to change anyway.
No, the planning process is really good, though. Whether you have a written plan or not, the process is excellent.
Yeah, it's a mental exercise that is required for successful people. And I think that's very, very important. So I want to kind of, as we close the show out, I want to ask you to give some advice. So as you think about the people that are listening to this show, they're entrepreneurs. Some are on the front end of their journey, like you were back in the early 90s, and some are much further down the road and are doing 9 figures. And there's a lot of people in between. So what would you say to that front end of the entrepreneurial spectrum? What is your advice as now someone who's been in the game for a very long time, successfully, whether you admit it or not, successfully doing what you do? What would you say to those people on the front end of the spectrum? What's your advice?
Learn marketing, study marketing. And by marketing, I might or might not mean sales, depends upon your business. Certain organizations don't really need salespeople today if they have good marketing. Other organizations do. But whether you call it client acquisition or customer acquisition or client attraction, marketing, selling, that we have to study that, because the world has changed. And what worked 20 years ago has not worked for 19 years. And what worked last year doesn't work today. So I just think that if you're on the front end of your journey, make marketing as much of a study as you make the technical aspects of your business.
So people are listening to this. I know they're going to want to get in touch with you, because they need to definitely go listen to the Advanced Selling Podcast. I'm a huge fan. I think if you have anything to do with sales, and you do, whether you know it or not, you need to go listen to the Advanced Selling Podcast. And you can find that on any podcast player. But how else would you recommend people to reach out and get in touch with you, Bill?
Yeah, a couple of things. The website's really easy, billcaskey.com. There's all sorts of arrows that you can point to that get you free videos and podcasts. We're also doing a webinar on later in March. And if you go to billcaskey.com, in the very top sliver, there's a banner there that says get on a wait list. Make sure you fill out that information. Nobody's going to come chase you around. We'll just make sure you get an invite to a webinar. The webinar is about the dilemmas facing high achievers today, high performers, people who are already good at what they do, and they're trying to get to the next level, and some of the dilemmas that they're facing. And I've got some solutions for them. So if you're that kind of person, or in sales or leadership of any kind, and you have people who are high performers, you need to be on that. So billcaskey.com.
All right. So Bill, thank you so very much for being here. It's an honor after all these years of me listening to your show. Now I get to, once this is published and produced, I get to listen to it, my show, but your voice on it. And it'll be surreal after listening to you for so many years. So thank you for being here.
You've been a good supporter of ours, and I've always enjoyed the time together. I'm honored that you would ask me to be on, and your questions are excellent. You're good at this. You've got a great microphone. You're good at asking questions. So there you go. Thank you.
All right, Bill. Well, thank you very much. And we'll see you next time.
Okay.
Well, there you have it. Another amazingly successful entrepreneur telling us about his journey to success. Now, admittedly, Bill was a little shy of admitting, and very, very humble about admitting his success, but don't let that fool you. The guy is extremely successful. And not only is he successful, he's helped people like me and other people like you become successful by implementing sales tactics, strategies, and mindset that absolutely changes the game. Go pick up his book, Same Game, New Rules. It's an older book, it's been around for a long time, but nevertheless, as I said, has amazing content that will help you up your sales game right now. So I encourage you to go to his website, like you talked about there at the end, billcaskey.com, sign up to get on that wait list for his webinar about the dilemmas that are facing high achievers. So make sure you go do that. And again, big thanks to Bill for coming on the show. It's an honor to have somebody that I've been listening to for so long be the guest of mine on my show. And I also want to finish up by referring back to what I was saying in the intro, that if you want to know a little bit more about how to get more and how to work less as an entrepreneur, how to automate your business so that you don't have to be the center of it, I want you to come to my free webinar. All you got to do is go to therealjasonduncan.com/webinar, sign up, and you can come for free and hear about my 4 strategies on how to get you out of the weeds to get more time, more money, and more freedom. Make sure you tune in again next week when I talk to another very successful entrepreneur about his or her journey to success. Until then, remember, I am the real Jason Duncan, and Jesus is King.
Thank you for listening to another edition of The Root of All Success with the real Jason Duncan. If you've enjoyed this week's episode, we invite you to visit therootofallsuccess.com to access the show notes and other helpful resources. Take charge of your business. Grow it from great to incredible. Join us again next time here on The Root of All Success.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.